Hello friends and welcome. It's almost halfway through the year, so I thought we could do a little catch up on what books I have been loving so far in 2024. I've read about 60 books so far this year, and I would say overall I have been enjoying most of what I've been reading, but finding books that I absolutely love and I want to rave about to you has been a little less common this year. So at first I was planning to do my top 10 favorite books, but when I listed them out, there was a very clear and big gap and a big jump between my 6th favorite and my 5th favorite. I feel like my 5 favorites are definitely solidly my favorites of the year so far, and the books that fill out the 6 to 10, I really like them. I'm glad I read them, but I don't know that I want them to be considered favorites, you know? I don't think they quite deserve to make it into a video like this. So we're just going to talk about my top 5 favorite books so far. And I've actually managed to rank them. So let's dive right in. With number 5, it's The Last Quintista. This book I read very early in January and I loved it. I read it as part of my Reading Booktuber's favorite books, and it was actually because of Mara that I finally got around to reading this. It's been on my shelf for a little while. I had been highly anticipating it, but even I was not quite ready for how much I was going to enjoy it. This is a middle grade book that I would recommend to readers 10, maybe 11 plus. And it's actually a near future dystopia sci-fi, which I feel thematically would be a lot easier to sell if it were aged up slightly and sit comfortably in the young adult category. But equally, I'm really glad to see something like this written for middle grade readers, because there's not a lot of sci-fi in middle grade. Anyway, essentially in this story, we follow a young girl named Petra who is living, as I said, in the near future on Earth with her family. But basically, a comet is about to hit the planet. And so a very small number of people are hand selected to hop on a couple of spaceships and head to a new homeworld. Petra's parents are quite important scientist kind of people, so her family is one of the few selected to leave planet Earth, which obviously in and of itself comes with a whole range of complex emotions, especially because Petra is leaving behind her grandmother, who she loves dearly, and from whom she has inherited both a love and a gift for storytelling. So Petra and her family are put to sleep so that they will wake up in a few hundred years once the spaceships have arrived. But basically, while they're asleep, some shit goes down with the people who are staying awake to keep everybody safe. And so what Petra wakes up to is a very different reality than the one that she was expecting. So it's very thematically rich, a lot of details and a lot going on. And essentially through this story, we're asked questions about what it is to be human and what is it that we value about humanity. While there definitely have been a handful of young readers that I've been able to successfully recommend this to and who have come back and said they've loved it, I do feel like this is one of those middle grades that older readers particularly are really going to love and connect with. It's beautifully written, very powerful, and some of the twists and turns, they really got me. Okay, so my 4th favorite book of the year, I'm cheating a little bit and I'm kind of picking 2, but to me this is one story. It's the graphic novel series, or the duology, Garlic and the Vampire and Garlic and the Witch. This is such a sweet little duology, and they're very short. I also read them back to back, so to me it kind of is just Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the same story. In this story, we get to know our little main character, Garlic, who is an anthropomorphic garlic. She's alive. She lives with a bunch of other vegetables who have been brought to life by this witch to help her out in her garden. And Garlic is a very anxious, kind of people-pleasing character who doesn't always feel like she belongs and is just always desperate to do the right thing. When one day a vampire moves into a castle nearby and everybody is kind of freaking out about why is this vampire here? Does he have nefarious plans? And so it is up to our little Garlic to go and visit this vampire, because obviously she's Garlic and she is the one who is most safe around a vampire in theory. So it is she who must go and investigate, go and see what this vampire is up to. And what she discovers is delightfully unexpected. And overall, this series, this duology, is just so cute and warm. It's one of those wholesome found family kind of stories, and I just loved it. I ate up every second. And while I think the first book was my favorite, the way that the second book kind of wrapped everything up and was almost like this allegory for puberty or coming of age, I thought was really beautiful too. And so they do make a kind of perfect story whole together. The artwork is just beautiful, and I feel like if you're a fan of something like the Tea Dragon Society, this is definitely a series that you need to get your hands on. I loved it. I just loved it. What can I say? In 3rd place, we have the only non-fiction making an appearance on this list, and that is Dear Son, Letters and Reflections from First Nations Fathers and Sons, and this is a collection edited by Thomas Mayer. And this book is exactly what it says on the tin. A whole bunch of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men have written letters to their sons. And all of these letters are so open-hearted and generous and honest. And through them, there's definitely a theme of exploring the intersections of masculinity and First Nations identity. And you really just get a sense of how much love these men have for their children, but also like this really strong sense of just how much colonialism has impacted their sense of self, their sense of masculinity, and their relationship with fatherhood, both as fathers themselves, but also how they experienced their fathers, or in some cases didn't because of the stolen generations. Thomas Mayer talks about how this book kind of came to be. It was in the wake of the Northern Territory intervention, which is essentially an apartheid system imposed upon Indigenous people in the Northern Territory in order to protect and save them. And so Thomas Mayer speaks about how the implementation and the discussion around the Northern Territory intervention really impacted him and his sense of self and his sense of relationships and safety as an Indigenous man. And so in so many ways, this book is these men reckoning with the ways in which colonialism and white supremacy has impacted them and their ability to be fathers, or the way that they feel like they can be fathers. But it's also just so tender. I cannot express to you how tender this entire book is. It is so filled to the brim with love. Like, we're often talking about toxic masculinity and stuff, you know, and how harmful that is to all people, including men. And this book felt like it was a project in decolonizing masculinity, and it just felt healing and beautiful and powerful and just so beautiful. At the end of the day, I left this book kind of just welling up with tears because it felt like such a privilege to be able to witness something so beautiful, and at the end of the day, so courageous. And this is definitely going to be one of my favorite nonfiction books of the year. I mean, currently it is my favorite of the year, and I feel like this is one of those books that I'll return to, I'll keep thinking about. I just loved it. I don't think this book sold as well as the publisher was hoping or expecting, because I managed to find this book on a very steep discount. So if you're in Australia and you come across this book, or maybe you should go out of your way to find it, because I think it's something really special. And it really is a beautiful book to look at too. Like, there's some poetry, there's some artwork. It's just gorgeous. And featured in this are some names that you'll recognize, like Stan Grant, Troy Cassar-Daley, Joel Little, but there are also names that I didn't recognize. Anyway, I just think this is wonderful, and if you're in Australia particularly, I think you need to read it. Okay, next up we have a book that you actually chose for me to read, and I recently did a whole spoiler-filled reading vlog for you. It is, of course, Lonely Castle in the Mirror. I loved this book so much. This is a Japanese fantasy novel, but it's actually written by, I think, a mystery writer. And now that I know that, I can definitely appreciate how the skills of a mystery writer have been implemented here so effectively. Basically, it's a portal fantasy story, and our main character, Kokoro, she essentially has stopped going to school due to being bullied. And one day, while she's just like chilling at home, her mirror lights up and she touches it and she gets transported into this castle. There she meets the Wolf Queen, who lists off a bunch of rules about this castle, and she also meets some other children. And I really don't want to say too much to spoil it. If you want to be spoiled, like I said, head to that spoiler-filled reading vlog that I've done. But what I will say is that this is a very slow-paced, character-centered book. It kind of sits in a similar universe to like Before the Coffee Gets Cold, but I would say a better comparison for this would definitely be The Miracles of the Nunya General Store. I think both of those books offer a good comparison for the kind of magic and like the level of magic, I suppose, in this story, and also the character-centeredness of it, but also like the moral themes that we get to explore through the stories. Although it is a very slow-paced book, I was intrigued from start to finish. There are just so many kind of small questions that arise throughout the story because we are so slowly getting information revealed to us. And so although it's very slow, I'm clearly somebody who appreciates a slow, character-centered novel anyway, but even though it's very, very slow, I was not bored for a single moment. For me, the investment in these characters and the intrigue about like what's happening with this castle, and I had so many questions about these kids and also around the magic system as well. It was honestly just a pleasure to read. And by the time I got to the end and everything, just the way everything wraps up, I was floored. I was floored and I was a sobbing mess. It's so thoughtful and tender and honest, and ultimately it felt like such a powerful exploration of the obligations that we each have to each other and what happens when a community fails in those obligations, particularly when it comes to children. It's also a story about how we impact and influence each other, often without even knowing it. So I suppose in so many ways this book is a call to kindness, and I I just loved it. I'm gonna tear up thinking about it again now. So a well-deserved second place of my favorites so far this year. And then finally, number one, honestly, it's number one by quite a margin. I love this book. I think it's one of my new favorite books of all time. And I'm sure you know what's coming. It is, of course, Clara and the Sun. This is another book that I read very early on in the year for one of my BookTubers videos. And I cannot get over how much I loved this book. Again, this is a slow-paced, character-centered kind of story. This one, though, is more sci-fi than fantasy. It's definitely kind of like a near-future story. Is it dystopia? Is it utopia? Not really sure. What it is, though, is subtle and quiet and brilliant. This is a first-person narrated story centered on our main character, Clara, who is an AF, or an artificial friend. Basically, she's this kind of android that is programmed and designed to be a friend to children, or more specifically to wealthy children. And so through this story and through Clara's eyes, we just get to kind of witness this near future society. And because it's all told from Clara's perspective, it's very, like, it's so interesting. Basically, she only has access to the information that has been deemed important for her to fulfill her role as an artificial friend. And so there's some just very curious things that pop up for her. For example, she ends up basically forming this like religious practice around the sun. But through this story, she also develops a really interesting relationship with the young girl who selects her as her artificial friend. But we also get to watch like what this relationship is and how it differs from, you know, the relationships we think of ourselves having today. And we also watch the relationship Clara has with this little girl's family and kind of like how she's integrated into this family system. It's one of those books that doesn't hold your hand because like Clara is one of those narrators who knows what she knows and doesn't have the information outside of that, which means that we don't have information outside of that, besides from our own context and our own assumptions. For me, this book felt similar to reading something like The Sea of Tranquility, which I loved last year. It's not that it's the same in plot or even in themes, but the way that that story is told and how it feels small and subtle, but poignant and beautiful, how it's slow and unfolding, all of that, like that feeling I had reading this. But The Sea of Tranquility for me didn't necessarily feel all that new. It just felt like it executed something really perfectly. This book felt new to me. Like, yeah, we've had near future stories about androids before, but I don't think I've ever read one so clever and so subtle. Honestly, this felt masterful. I like could feel myself and my assumptions and my perceptions being like molded so carefully by the author, and the way in which information was revealed to us so cleverly and so intentionally. I just couldn't get over it. I couldn't get over it. I loved the atmosphere and the feeling of reading this book. I loved the language, I loved the characters, and I loved the subtle complexity of it all and the way that it just made me think, but also importantly, how it made me feel. It's one of those books that could do both so well. I feel like some books you're either like very in your head, very intellectual, and some books you're very in your feelings. This book managed to achieve both at the same time in like equal measure, and it was just awe-inspiring. It was captivating. It was mesmerizing. I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop reading. I was just obsessed. And so obviously this is definitely far and away my favorite book that I've read so far this year. And like I said, it has made its way in my mind into my like ultimate all-time favorites list. So there we have it, my 5 favorite books so far of 2024. Let me know what you think of my list. Have you read any of these? Did you love them as much as I did? Or let me know what your top 5 favorite books so far this year have been. A big thank you as always to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon, and especially big thank you to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie. And thanks so much for watching. I will see you again soon. Until then, happy reading, happy whatever it is that you like to do. Bye!